Alright, I've kinda been avoiding this topic, mostly because there's so much nonsense out there when it comes to light power output. A lot of popular videos on lighting gear throw around all kinds of bold claims. And they aren't always completely false, but often just useless for anyone wanting to understand the light power concept. Some creators will show off these massive 1K plus watt LED monsters placed behind windows, claiming that you need that kind of firepower for cinematic results. And I'm just sitting there thinking I could pull off the exact same look with a 100 watt light, no problem. Then on the flip side you've got the minimalists who swear that anything above 60 watts is overkill. Both camps try to back it up with examples that sorta make sense, but only if you ignore the other half of the scenarios in real-world production. And of course everyone starts preaching about the inverse square law, like it's the base of all lighting knowledge. So let's clear that up right now. There is no actual law named that way. No one officially named it, and physicists from centuries ago already understood this basic concept of how light spreads few centuries before that name appeared. If you grew up reading serious physics books like Feynman lectures or Resnick and Halliday, you won't even see that term.
There's no miracle, people. It just happens they got interested in this thing and they learned all this stuff.
In fact, in many languages it doesn't exist at all at any level of education. I grew up in Poland and made it to the finals of the National Physics Olympics back in high school, and I never once saw anything called the inverse square law in college-level textbooks that I was using. Somewhere in the 20th century people just slapped a label on a basic geometric principle connected with light propagation for the theoretical point light source. It's like someone suddenly started preaching about double bullet speed law, because if a bullet made twice as far in the same amount of time, it must be going twice as fast. Sure, it's technically true, but giving it a fancy name just hides the concept of Newton physics behind some name. That's the level of dumb we are dealing with when people start waving around that so-called law to explain how light works. They throw up a formula and go, see, boom, you get it now. But no, you don't. And I'm going to show you exactly why this kind of thinking is pure BS. And yes, I do mean bad science. So by the end of this video, you will understand why both the 1200 watt and 60 watt loyalists are so passionate about their gear, and why the inverse square law is probably making you worse at lighting, not better. And also I believe that you will know what light you ought to buy or not to buy. Let's start with something super basic and super overlooked. How much extra power do you actually need to make your scene look twice as bright? Did you ever thought about that? If you thought the answer was double the wattage, sorry, wrong. I'm assuming you are already familiar with the concept of EV stops. One stop of light or one EV means twice the amount of light hitting the subject. But that doesn't mean the image looks twice as bright to your eyes. Perception is weird like that. In fact, there are hundreds of studies on human sensitivity to changes in brightness, and there's no single definition of what twice as bright even means for our perception. First off, people perceive brightness differently. And secondly, our vision responds to contrast differently depending on the ambient lighting and the character of the light source. For instance, research shows that our perception of twice as bright varies if you are looking at a single point light in a pitch black room versus a soft LED panel in a bright white room. It's complicated and honestly not worth going too deep into the science. To feel like a scene is twice as bright, you may need 6 to 10 times more light. That's up to 3 EVs more. Take a raw image and boost it up by 1 EV. Does it feel twice as bright? Probably not. But a lot of beginners looking at LED lights assume a 600 watt unit will make the scene look twice as bright as a 300 watts one. So what's going on here? Part of it is that one EV doesn't look that different visually, but in some cases that one stop does make a difference. Like it can save underexposed raw footage when you try to recover it in post. Still, that's not the main point. The difference in power is real, but many beginners don't yet understand how we actually use high-powered lights. First off, you are not trying to outshine the sun. Spoiler alert, you want. You're lighting the space, not the subjects, especially in wide shots. And when you are lighting a wide shot, you are placing your lights much farther from your subject. Now enter the inverse square law. Let me explain with pizza. Say you've got a 30 cm pizza and a 44 cm one. Only the smaller one is discounted if you buy two. Some people assume two smaller pizzas are better. Hey, two is more than one, right? But area-wise, that 44 cm pizza gives you more than both 30 cm ones combined, and it's cheaper. Why? Because area grows with the square of the radius. Humans just aren't wired to intuitively grasp square relationships. Throwing around the term inverse square law doesn't magically help us understand it better. So let's get back to lighting. Imagine you are using a standard 45 degrees reflector that creates a light circle with a 2-meter radius. That puts your light about 4.8 meters away. Now move it back by just 1 meter. Doesn't sound like much, right? Well, that extra meter increases the lit area by nearly 50%. Translation: if light power stays the same, intensity per square meter drops to around 2/3 of what it was. That's almost like cutting your lamp's output in half. Go a bit further and you've essentially dropped in light output like from 600 watt unit to a 300 watt one. So yeah, moving your light back just a little in a big scene can have more impact than doubling the wattage, and we are just getting started. Then we've got modifiers, and trust me, modifiers change everything. Here are some real readouts showing how different modifiers affect output. The differences are huge. Sometimes you need significantly more power just to match the brightness with a different modifier setup. And that's before we even touch external factors. On set, we use a lot of lamps, a lot of modifiers, and some modifiers eat light. That's just the reality. You might want to get by with a 60 watt unit, and believe me, everyone would love to carry only 2 kg lights instead of dragging 30 kg monsters up the stairs, but real-world lighting doesn't always allow that. Another thing people misunderstand: the inverse square law assumes a point light that emits isotropic radiation. That means equal intensity in every direction. But guess what isn't a point light? Pretty much every LED fixture. Guess what else doesn't emit light in all directions? Any directional modifier. Even a reflector changes the equation. Add a huge diffusion surface and now you are not even in the same math world anymore. Inverse square law doesn't apply. In fact, that square in the denominator is still present, but the math gets warped by modifiers and their ability to change some of its parameters. Fresnels are everywhere on a set, for a good reason. Basically, you can focus them. You are not blasting light everywhere, you are shaping it, targeting it. When you pull a Fresnel back, you tighten the beam to keep intensity up. This compensates for the fall-off the inverse square law would predict. In real-life cinematography, you position lights based on framing and composition. Then you use modifiers to shape what you need. The lamp's output comes only after that. So what about modifiers you can't shape? Like a rigid reflector. The thing is, you almost never use them directly from far away, unless you want to light the whole room, which most of the time you don't. And when you do want full scene light, you are probably bouncing or diffusing that light. And guess what happens to inverse square law when we have huge bounce light? Yeah, it breaks apart. If you deal with cinematic lighting, you consider every wall and furniture a source of bounce and diffuse light. You fill the shadows with many bounces all around the space. So yeah, inverse square law, not very useful. Understanding physics, this is useful stuff. As lighting pros, gaffers, cinematographers, we almost never move lights just to tweak the intensity per square meter. We move them to shape the scene, carve out shadows and balance contrasts. And when we do pull lights back, we are usually adjusting modifiers too, like tightening Fresnels and changing beam angles to maintain the look. Want a brighter image? Just use your power knob on your light, or tweak your camera settings. You've got options. Because light sources serve different roles in video production, you really need to think about two main characteristics: the physical size of the lamp and the power output. And just to keep things simple, let's focus on Bowens mount single-point LEDs, the most versatile category of lights. Between those two factors, size is often more important than raw power. But first, let's go back to the power scaling issue. By now, you should realize there's not much visible difference between 300 watt and 600 watt. If you want a real noticeable jump in brightness, you need something like 8 times increase in power. For many people, 60 watt on the low end and 1200 watts on the high are the practical extremes. Lights below 60 watts don't give you much room to work with, and anything above 1200 watts usually only makes sense for rentals or bigger productions with larger crews. It's valid to say that paying twice as much for just one EV more light often isn't worth it, especially near the 1 kilowatt mark. Usually both the price and weight almost doubles for that one stop of light. That argument can be changed down the power scale to support the idea that 60 watt to 120 watt is really all you need. And honestly, in many cases that's true. Sometimes it's even more efficient to buy two 100 watt lights than one 300 watt light, especially considering price and flexibility. And I can assure you right away that if you are thinking about your first light and you are looking at something around 500 watt, just take two weaker units for the same price. You will need it. But here's what's not talked about enough, especially in YouTube videos. You often don't want a 600 watt lamp just to get 2 EVs more output than a 150 watt one. You just want to maintain the same brightness per square meter but illuminate a 4 times larger area. In video, you often want big diffused sources to work their magic on skin tones, but diffusion materials aren't perfect. They eat a ton of light. So there's a sensible lower limit to how dim a lamp can be before it becomes useless with larger diffusion surfaces, especially in video when you operate on fixed shutter speed. When your diffusion area grows, you either need more lights or a single, more powerful source. And if you frame it like that from that angle, a light that's 4 times more powerful can do the job of 4 weaker lights without the extra gear, cables and setup time. Logistically and economically, a single strong unit can make a lot more sense. Plus, some lighting setups or modifiers absorb so much light they are simply unusable with low power LEDs in most environments. So only one high output source can unlock techniques that just aren't possible with smaller lights. In professional work, that flexibility is key. You want options. You want to know that if needed, you've got a light powerful enough to handle any setup. Trying to fight the sun is a losing battle. Now it's time to make that statement real. A 1200 watts aperture with a standard reflector puts out around 13,000 lux at 3 meters. That sounds impressive, until you realize that direct sunlight, that's about 100,000 lux. Middle of the day, no clouds, and you are getting absolutely blasted. If you use a really narrow, high-end focusing modifier, you can actually match that sunlight level with something like 2400 watts monster units. And in high-end production, they roll out the big guns. Almost 20k watts HMIs or these 5k LEDs. A lot of them. And these are the first tools that can simulate the sun's output in a believable way for a wider scene. But even then, you are not overpowering the sun, you are imitating it. That's why some productions will grid up dozens of these units on cranes, powered by truck-sized generators. It's insane, and it's all to match sunlight in a controlled environment, not to fight against it. Because, truthfully, you don't want to battle the sun. It moves, it shifts, clouds roll in and change everything. Your whole setup gets wrecked. The industry standard approach is to block out the sun as much as possible, so your scene stays consistent and under control. Now let's bring this back down to earth, especially for small crews or solo shooters. A 1200 watt light isn't something you just toss around casually. It's heavy, it's bulky, you really need 2 people and proper grip gear just to set it up safely. And even if you achieve almost sun-like output with this unit, you will have it only in one small small spot due to need of using highly focused spotlight adapters, and we are talking about light being 2 or 3 meters away from the subject. So this is unrealistic assumption, and even at 5 meters we are talking about an order of magnitude lower output than sun, so wider shots are out of the question. And put any kind of soft modifier on it and now you are in a completely different league. The output drops even more. Let's switch the scenario. Say you are outside on an overcast day. Now the ambient light sits between 1000 and 5000 lux. That's something a 1200 watts light can match with sensible modifiers, if you keep it close. So yeah, you can use it to shape light in these conditions, especially if you are working under a butterfly screen and keeping your scene small and controlled. But often you would need few of them for the whole lighting setup. Now let's go indoors. In a bright sunny room, you might be dealing with 300 to 1000 lux. If it's a darker north-facing room, maybe 100 to 300. That's a huge drop from outdoors. And remember what we talked about earlier? How perceived brightness doesn't scale linearly? That same weird math works in reverse. A room that feels like half as bright as outdoors might actually need 10 times less lighting power to match. Think about it. Trying to match sunlight outdoors might need a 10 kilowatt setup. But inside a dimly lit room, you can probably achieve similar results with 200 watts. Maybe less if you control the ambient light a bit more. So close the curtains, hang up some black blankets. You can cut your lighting needs by a factor of tens. That's huge from the lighting power needed perspective. Let's take the Nonlight Forza 6C as an example. With its narrow reflector, it hits around 10,000 lux at 1 meter. With the bare bulb, around 2000 lux. Step back to 3 meters and you are still getting over 1000 lux with a reflector and about 300 lux bare. That means even this small 60-watt unit can still contribute meaningfully in a dimly lit room. It might not overpower the ambient light, but it can match it or nudge the contrast a bit. Now, if you want to control the lighting, really overpower the ambient light, you have two options. Cut the ambient light by 10 times with curtains, flags, negative fill, and suddenly that 60-watt light becomes a little beast. Or go the other way around and bring in a 600-watt fixture and achieve the same effect without changing your environment so much. Now you see where this is heading. That 60-watt to 1200-watt range, that's the sweet spot for small crews and indoor work. If you are stacking multiple layers of diffusion or bouncing off a wall, your 60-watt unit might start to struggle. If you don't have more powerful lights on hand, you are pretty much stuck working with the ambient light, not against it. And managing ambient light? That's just as much a part of lighting as turning on a fixture. It's part of the craft. That's why I always tell my students, practice lighting setups using 60 to 100 watt lights. You will be forced to learn how to control your environment. That's where the learning really happens. But when it's time for real production work, bigger scenes, sometimes less control over location, you will want one or two around 600 watt units. Why 600 watt? Because the jump from 600 watt to 1200 watt is big in size, weight and price. If you need that kind of firepower, you are probably on a set with the budget and manpower to block ambient light anyway. So hopefully by now you can see the full picture. Both 60 watts and 600 watts units have their place. 60 watt lights are awesome for learning small setups or detail lighting. Great for rounding things out. So where's the actual bottom limit when it comes to usable lighting power? In video work, that's usually defined by your camera settings. Let's use a pretty standard example. ISO 400, shutter speed 1/60 for 30 frames per second and an f2.8 aperture. If you run the numbers for proper exposure, you land at around 300 lux to light a human face correctly. In a small setup, like a typical YouTube desk scene, you can hit that level with a single 60 watt light and some light diffusion. But that's really pushing it near the edge of what that unit can do. If the scenes is a bit wider, like here, or if you want to illuminate the background and the surroundings too, you are probably going to need a few of those 60 watt lights or just go for a 300 watt unit, which gives you a lot more breathing room. That's why I say 60 watt lights do make sense for a lot of real world situations. Maybe not as your main light on bigger setups, but they are perfect for fill, hair light or just adding that little bit of punch where needed. For small indoor scenes, my go-to universal setup is one stronger light, somewhere between 300 watt and 600 watt that I can run through diffusion, and two 60 watt bicolor units. I will use those with focused beams, Fresnels or narrow beam reflectors like ones Nanlite includes in the Forza series. That setup gives me flexibility to shape, balance and tweak my look without hauling a van full of gear. Now, if you are shopping for your first COB light, my advice is simple. Go with the cheapest model you can find from a reputable brand. Don't overthink it. The super budget no-name Chinese lights technically work, but they will probably drive you nuts with clunky controls, janky mounts or fans that sound like a lawnmower. You want something you will actually enjoy using, not something that makes you want to punch a wall every time you turn it on. And here's the thing, LED lights are tough. Like really tough. If you get one from a decent brand, it can take a beating and still keep working for years, sometimes over a decade. My first ever 150 watts unit was the Godex SL150. That thing has been through everything. We've used it as a construction site work light, dropped it from 3 meters height, hit every corner of it, covered it in enough cement dust to build a whole new house, and it still works flawlessly. It's just stupidly indestructible. If a friend offers you a cheap used light, don't hesitate. Worst case scenario, you will sell it later for the same price. No loss there. Now, of course, there's a whole world beyond COBs. Ballast-based lights, all-in-one designs with internal power supplies, LED mats, tube lights, the list goes on. But that's a topic for another video. Alright, I will wrap it here. If this video gave you some value, feel free to drop a like, leave a comment or subscribe. Every reaction helps the algorithm and honestly, it means a lot. Catch you in the next one.